Mexico has enacted a comprehensive and deeply strategic policy change by establishing minimum export prices for its fresh tomatoes, a direct and calculated response to the U.S. government's recent decision to impose a 17% tariff. Welcome viewers to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. This action goes far beyond a simple retaliation. It is a meticulously crafted countermeasure designed to address the core grievances that led to the U.S. withdrawal from the 2019 suspension agreement. That accord had previously provided a stable and predictable framework for the multi-billion-dollar tomato trade between the two nations. The U.S. Commerce Department's unilateral termination of this agreement reignited a long-standing and contentious trade dispute rooted in accusations that Mexican producers were unfairly dumping their products, selling them at prices below production cost. To gain a competitive edge, Mexico's new policy, announced jointly by its influential economic and agricultural ministries, is a robust effort to safeguard the country's vast domestic agricultural industry and ensure its continued access to the essential U.S. market. Producers had issued dire warnings that their already razor-thin profit margins could not possibly sustain the added financial burden of the tariffs. This would have inevitably destabilized a critical industry and led to widespread economic hardship for hundreds of thousands of agricultural workers and their families. This new pricing floor is a proactive attempt to stabilize the market and provide a predictable framework for producers. The economic stakes are immense and go far beyond a simple trade dispute. Of the approximately 2 million metric tons of fresh tomatoes that Mexico is projected to export in 2025, a staggering 1.8 million tons are destined for the United States, representing a profound dependency on a single market. This extreme reliance meant the new U.S. tariffs posed a significant and existential threat to Mexico's economic stability, with experts forecasting a potential 5% to 10% drop in exports and the loss of as many as 200,000 jobs in the sector. By establishing a price floor, Mexico's government hopes to mitigate these risks and create a more resilient and predictable market environment for its producers. The new minimum prices are meticulously tailored to specific tomato varieties. Cherry and grape tomatoes now have a minimum export price of $1.70 per kilogram. Roma tomatoes are set at 88 cents per kilogram, and round, stem tomatoes at $1.65 per kilogram. These prices are not arbitrary. They have been carefully calibrated to ensure that exports are not sold below their production costs, which was a central issue in the U.S. anti-dumping investigations. This move is a proactive measure to prevent further escalation and directly challenges the U.S. claim of unfair trade practices, essentially forcing a recalibration of the market. This policy isn't just about prices. It's about asserting control and demonstrating a commitment to fair trade on Mexico's terms. It is a strategic effort to reclaim the narrative in a dispute that has long been defined by U.S. accusations. This decision has been met with significant and widespread support from Mexico's tomato producers, who had previously expressed deep and existential concerns about their ability to absorb the new tariffs. Moises Atri, an export director for Veggie Prime, underscored the precarious nature of the industry's profit margins and articulated a hope that American clients would ultimately share some of the financial burden. He cautioned that the new tariff could cripple smaller producers and potentially force some out of business entirely, an outcome that would have ripple effects throughout local economies. From the U.S. perspective, Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick has justified the tariffs as a necessary step to protect American farmers for what he termed unfair trade practices. This sentiment is particularly potent among growers in states like Florida, who have long and vocally complained that they're being unfairly undercut by the influx of cheaper Mexican produce. The historical context of this dispute is crucial, with previous suspension agreements dating back to 1996 that were periodically renewed to set minimum prices and avoid the imposition of tariffs. The latest development, however, highlights the inherent fragility of these agreements and the constant, underlying tension between the two nations' agricultural sectors. It also demonstrates the immense difficulty of balancing competing national economic interests with the realities of a highly interconnected, globalized supply chain, where the actions of one country have immediate and tangible consequences for another. The Mexican government's decree applies exclusively to definitive exports and does not place any restrictions on export volumes or establish a price cap. Officials have been careful to emphasize that the policy's primary goal is to strengthen the existing order of the industry, not to create new trade barriers or distort the market. This proactive step is also viewed by some, including Georgina Felix of the Fresh Produce Association of the Americas, as a forward-thinking way to proactively avoid future increases in anti-dumping duties, which could further escalate the trade war. The minimum prices are not a static policy. They will be reviewed at least annually, or even more frequently if market conditions change. This built-in flexibility allows the Mexican government to adapt the policy as needed to remain relevant and effective. The political backdrop is complex, with President Donald Trump having previously announced a 90-day pause on higher tariffs for Mexico with the hope of reaching a lasting trade deal. This latest action from Mexico, however, shows a determination to protect its industry without waiting for a new agreement. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has voiced strong confidence in the resilience of the country's tomato exports, asserting that the U.S. demand for Mexican tomatoes is so great that trade will continue, even with the new tariffs. The ongoing situation underscores the fragility of North American trade relations, with a staple food item like the tomato becoming a central point of contention in a much larger geopolitical and economic struggle. This entire scenario highlights the intricate dance of international commerce, where a single product can become a symbol of broader trade conflicts and national economic strategies, impacting thousands of livelihoods on both sides of the border. It's a textbook example of how domestic policy can have immediate and far-reaching international consequences, shaping not just markets, but also the lives of real people. Deeper economic and political context. The economic and political dynamics underpinning this trade dispute are far more intricate than a simple disagreement over pricing. This conflict is a microcosm of a much broader, ongoing debate about globalization versus protectionism. The U.S. imposition of tariffs, spurred by complaints from domestic growers, represents a clear turn toward protectionist policies aimed at shielding a national industry from foreign competition. Conversely, Mexico's response, while seemingly protectionist in its own right, is in fact a defensive maneuver to maintain its position within a globalized market, where its entire economic model for this sector is built on access to the U.S. consumer base. The establishment of a minimum price is an attempt to play by the rules of international trade, specifically addressing the dumping allegations, rather than escalating with retaliatory tariffs that could trigger a full-blown trade war. This strategic approach is designed to be palatable to international trade bodies and to demonstrate that Mexico is acting in good faith. The ripple effects of this dispute extend beyond just the immediate stakeholders. U.S. consumers, accustomed to a steady and affordable supply of fresh produce year-round, may soon face higher prices and reduced availability, as Mexico provides the majority of the fresh tomatoes consumed in the U.S. Any significant disruption to this supply chain is felt directly at the grocery store checkout. The average American family's food budget could be impacted, a sensitive issue in an era of already high inflation. This raises a critical question for U.S. policymakers. Is the benefit of protecting a relatively small number of domestic growers worth the potential cost to millions of consumers? Moreover, the political landscape is highly charged. The U.S. government's decision to terminate the 2019 agreement and impose tariffs is seen by many in Mexico as a political move, a result of lobbying efforts by U.S. agricultural interests. The timing is also significant, coming ahead of key elections in both countries, where economic policy and trade relations are often central campaign issues. The Mexican government, led by President Claudia Sheinbaum, is under immense pressure to show strength and protect its national interests without alienating its largest trading partner. Her confident assertion that U.S. demand for Mexican tomatoes will continue despite the tariffs is a strategic statement aimed at reassuring domestic producers and signaling to the U.S. that Mexico will not be bullied. The long-term consequences of this dispute are uncertain. Will this new pricing policy be enough to satisfy U.S. concerns and lead to a new, more stable agreement?